Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven speaking to you from south of Jerusalem here in the land of Israel. And today is the 10th day of the month of Sivan 5783. It's May 30th, 2023. This coming Shabbat, we here in Israel will be reading Parashat Beha'alotcha, the third parasha, the third Torah reading of the book of Bamidbar, that is Numbers. All you in the diaspora, however, will be reading the second parashat, Naso, which we read this past Shabbat. But, as you may be aware, Jews in the diaspora celebrate the festival holidays of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, each the first and the final day for 2 days. It's a 2-day holiday, and that originated many centuries ago when, because of the lack of speedy, really instant communication, it was impossible for distant, far-flung diasporas to know exactly when the holiday would fall out. So to make sure that they didn't miss out at all, they would do 2 days. We do not suffer from that lack of speedy communication today, but in the diaspora, the holidays are still celebrated for 2 days, meaning that last Shabbat, Jews dwelling in the diaspora were celebrating the second day, as it were, of Shavuot. And on every holiday, we read a special Torah reading, and so there's a special Torah reading for the second day of Shavuot, which we don't read here in the land of Israel. And so because they were reading that on Shabbat, they weren't reading Parshat Naso, which we were reading. And so they'll be reading that this coming Shabbat, while we will be advancing to Parashat Beha'alotcha. So this discrepancy, which happens every year at different times, I believe will be resolved. I see that in the diaspora calendar in 12th of Tammuz, which is the 1st of July, I believe. Really about a month off. They will be reading in the diaspora Chukat Balak, a double parsha, which I believe will probably just be reading Balak here. So they will be catching up. A few weeks later, there's another double parsha, which I think we all read together. So I believe that in 1 month we'll be back on the same page, but time waits for no one, as the Rolling Stones told us many years ago, and it won't wait for me. So we here in Israel are advancing, and you will have to, as we say here in Israel, dance at 2 weddings at once. If you're in the diaspora, you'll hear our Torah teachings concerning Beha'alotcha, and if you're connected at home, and if you're in the diaspora, you'll be hearing about Parshat Naso. We here in Israel had a very wonderful Shavuot, receiving the Torah once again, just like the first time, with tremendous anticipation, tremendous joy, and we are thrilled to have this intimate connection to our Creator, this guide to life, this guide to show us the ways to connect with our Creator and to connect with one another, and to be decent people living decent lives. And let's see, it was Saturday evening after the conclusion of Shabbat, which we had a very hot day here in Israel, very hot, heavy. The air was still and heavy, muggy. It became very rainy, very windy, and we had a rainstorm very late in the year in Israel for a rainstorm. It rained throughout the night, on and off, lightning and thunder, and again the next day. Even yesterday, as I was returning yesterday evening, that is Monday evening, as I was returning home from the Beit Knesset, from the synagogue, there was flashes of lightning almost continuously in the air. So we've had some unusual weather, but every spring we always get unusual weather. So it's usual for us to get unusual weather. Although the quantity of rain that fell this late in the year certainly was not characteristic. In other news, a Torah giant, leader of the Haredi, the Orthodox world here in Israel, passed away today at the age of 100. Rabbi Gershon Edelstein was buried today in Bnei Brak. Tens of thousands, perhaps even more, attended his funeral. I don't know what the final count is, but oftentimes when Haredi ultra-Orthodox Torah giants pass away, the numbers attending their funerals are in the hundreds of thousands. And in other tragic news, a northern Samarian Jewish man was murdered today, assassinated, murdered by a terrorist, Palestinian terrorist. Meir Tamari, 32 years old, married and the father of a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and who had just, with his wife, had just 2 days ago completed the building of their own house in the town of Chermish in northern Samaria, was murdered, brutally murdered today. And so we mourn that loss. We offer our condolences to the widow and to the children and to the extended family and to the community and to all Am Yisrael, to all the people of Israel. And may Hashem avenge his blood. Hashem yikum domo. May Hashem avenge his blood. We need to put an end to this rampant terror, which is really centered in northern Samaria, in the cities of Jenin and Nablus and other Arab cities. And the IDF is every day, every night in these towns, arresting, engaging in gun battle, and killing, eliminating terrorists. But not fast enough to prevent this horrible terror attack and awful tragedy. So that's what's happening here in Israel. And I just want to remind everybody that, as I said, Shavuot was last Friday, and even though Shavuot was a one-day holiday in the Holy Temple, and people brought the beginning of the season of bringing your bikurim, your first fruits, but it wasn't so easy for everybody to arrive the first day in Jerusalem and to get into the temple in the first day. So while the official holiday was only one day, the official Torah-sanctioned holiday was only one day, the window for bringing their first fruits and participating in the very beautiful ceremony that accompanied the bringing of the first fruits and other offerings would continue for a full 7 days, just like any other pilgrimage holidays of Passover and Sukkot. And so we are in these days right now, and we also, as a remembrance to these days, there are certain prayers that we don't recite, certain entreaties to Hashem that we don't recite on these days, because these days have the aspect of being holidays, sort of semi-holidays. So that's where we are right now, and this will continue throughout the end of this week. And having said all that, let us move on to Parashat Behalotecha, which means when you raise up, but it's really referring to when you raise up, when you kindle the lamps on the menorah. And let's read those first few words in Hebrew and in English, first few verses from the book of Numbers, chapter 8, verse 1. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor daber el Aharon v'amart elav behalotecha את הנרות אל מול פני המנורה, יאירו שבעת הנרות. ויעש כן אהרון אל מול פני המנורה, העלה נרותיה כאשר ציווה השם את משה. וזה מעשה המנורה, מקשה זהב עד ירחה, עד פרחה, מקשה היא כמראה אשר הראה Hashem et Moshe, כן עשה את המנורה. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to Aaron and say to him, When you kindle the lamps, toward the face of the menorah shall the 7 lamps cast light. Aaron did so. Toward the face of the menorah he kindled its lamps, as Hashem had commanded Moshe. This is the workmanship of the menorah, hammered out gold. From its base to its flower it is hammered out. According to the vision that Hashem showed Moshe, so did he make the menorah. So we've read about the lighting of this menorah already, because this, of course, took place on the first day of the month of Nisan, the beginning of the second year of after Israel's exodus from Egypt, because this was the inauguration, the day of the dedication of the tabernacle. So why is it being mentioned again here and in a little more detail? So our sages have told us that, as you know, and as you may know if you haven't read it yet, if you're in a diaspora and you don't remember from last year, or this is the first time, Parshat Naso, which is the Parsha, the Torah reading which precedes Behalotecha, concludes with the gifts brought by each of the tribal leaders, the 12 tribal leaders, to the tabernacle on the day of its dedication. And of course, each Nasi, each tribal leader, brought the exact same gift, which contained many offerings and incense and implements, etc. And each one brought the identical offering, because no one, as our sages tell us, wanted to show up the others. There was no competition here. And each one's mentioned. Some people say, well, why couldn't the Torah have just mentioned like the first guy, which happened to be Nachshon, who was the head of the tribe of Judah? Why couldn't they have just mentioned him and said that the others all did the same thing? Because it's a very long reading. In fact, the Parshat of Naso, because of these 12 gifts, is the longest reading throughout the year, longest reading of the Torah. And again, we're told because for Hashem, each of these gifts is precious, and the idea that someone is giving is precious and should be noted and should be commemorated and should be it's praiseworthy. So each one gets mentioned, even though the wording in each of the 12 offerings, gifts that each of the 12 tribal leaders brought is precisely the same, except of course for the name of the tribal leader and his tribe. So why am I mentioning that now? Because after all that, according to Midrash, which is a behind-the-scenes look at what's going on, Aaron, who was the head of the Levitical family, Levitical tribes, which had their own encampment around the tabernacle, and Aaron's own encampment with his family, and Moshe was to the east of the tabernacle. He said, well, he was downcast. He said, well, they all got to bring a gift. I'm also the head of a household, the head of a tribe, and I didn't get to bring anything. And so Moshe says to Aaron, or Hashem tells Moshe to say to Aaron, B'chayecha, what are you talking about, Aaron? You have the greatest honor of them all. You have the greatest gift of them all, and that is to kindle the menorah, which you will do every morning. And so that's why it's mentioned right here, right now. And the expression Behalotecha means to raise up. And it's a very beautiful expression in describing kindling the 7 lamps of the menorah. Now, it either means, if you want to take it in a literal fashion, it could mean you're causing the flames to rise up by lighting the wicks. Also could mean that since the menorah itself was more or less the height of a man, that we know that in the tabernacle, in the temple, there were steps were made, 3 steps that the Kohen would ascend on so that he could more comfortably prepare the lamps and light the menorah. So in that regard, he also is going up. But of course, in a more abstract understanding, it means you're raising up light. You're just like every offering is we raise up an offering, right? This is another way of raising up our world, giving kedusha, giving holiness to our world. So it's a very beautiful opening to this parasha, and then it goes on, of course, to once again describe quickly how the menorah was constructed. Miksha echat, which is translated in many ways. Let me just look at another translation for one moment. Okay, see, it's translated now. A few things I'm looking at right now is hammered out, because hakasha, kasha is hard, and hakasha is to hit with something. So this miksha echat, this one piece, right, where the entire menorah was constructed of one piece of gold, and there's different understandings of how that might have been. In fact, Moshe, we're told, was perplexed by these instructions, like, how do I do this? He was scratching his head, and so Hashem, at the time when it needed to be constructed, we're told again by Midrash that Hashem showed him an image, a picture of how it is to look, how it's to be made, which is why here it says, according to the vision that Hashem showed Moshe. That's what this verse is referring to, that way back when they were constructing the implements, the vessels of the tabernacle, Hashem had to show Moshe a picture, as it were, of how the menorah is to be constructed. And so that's how he constructed it, Makshe Echat. So it's very interesting. There's different concepts, different ideas of how they might have made this in the desert. But I heard something once from an Israeli who I actually met in the United States. I think we both were visiting. And he was a meteorologist. Is that how you say it? And he pointed out to me something which probably many of you know, that gold, apparently when you take gold and you hammer it out into thin sheets, and when you put 2 sheets together and hammer them together, one on top of the other, actually molecularly they bond and become one piece. So this was his understanding, and I think I've read this also in Rashi, the 11th century commentator, that this is one concept, one idea, that yes, you could hammer separate pieces and then they become one. That was one method that it might have been constructed by. Moving along in the parsha, then there is the dedication or sanctification or purification of the Levites, which is a very fascinating ceremony. All the Levites are shaven, their entire bodies, and anointed, and made offerings in order to consecrate them so they can enter into service in the tabernacle from the age of 25 and up to the age of 50. So they had a 25-year work life, after which they were retired. And then we read about something we've discussed at least twice each year, and that is the second Passover. It's men who came to Moshe and said, we are impure because we have been in contact with a corpse, yet it is time for the Passover offering, this beginning of the second year in the wilderness. What are we to do? And so Moshe, who doesn't have an answer, consults with Hashem, who tells them the answer to the solution to their quandary. And we're not going to get into that right now. I say we talk about it twice a year because, of course, on the 14th day of Iyar, the second month, is Pesach Sheni, second Passover. And although we are not offering a Passover lamb on that, even as a second choice currently. We still mark it and make note of it. So that's why we usually talk about it then, and we talk about it now in this week's Parsha. And then, very interesting, the Parsha goes on to talk about the tabernacle, the cloud that covered it, the fire that was seen over it at night, and the cloud by day, and how when the cloud would raise up, it was time to move on, and how the Levites all had their roles, the different jobs to do in taking apart and packing up and carrying the tabernacle and its vessels until Hashem gave the signal that it's time to stop, put down your equipment, set up the tabernacle, set up camp, and you might be in a place for a day and you might be in a place for years. It was up to Hashem as he led Israel through the wilderness. I was thinking about this, and it's really a beautiful, beautiful concept that we traveled, we walked with Hashem. When Hashem wanted to go, we went. When Hashem wanted to stop, we stopped. And we don't do that today. We're stationary. On the other hand, we do walk with Hashem, and we do go where Hashem tells us to go as individuals and as a people. And we do go when Hashem says go, and we do stop when Hashem says stop. And, throughout the year, we pass from different phases of sometimes happy times, sometimes sad times, sometimes constructive signs, sometimes destructive, sometimes fruitful, sometimes less fruitful, sometimes happy, sometimes sad. These are all journeys from one place to another. And, they come upon us sometimes out of nowhere. But it's always a message from Hashem. It's always a directive. It's always, time to move on or time to pitch a tent and settle in. As spiritual beings, we cannot be in the same place. We cannot be an idol. We always have to be moving. We always have to be going from somewhere to somewhere. And even when we are physically in one place, we need to be moving, or at least embellishing, enhancing where we're stationed at the moment. So I do believe and I do feel that just like the Israelites in the wilderness, we are constantly marching toward our destination, toward our promised land, toward a better future, hopefully, a better tomorrow, toward the fulfillment of Hashem's promise. And may we continue to always journey forth. Now, in the Parsha, it gives a very beautiful, precise, succinct, detailed, yet succinct description of how the encampment moved forward, of the construction of some silver trumpets, and how the silver trumpets were used to send a message to the different tribes that it's time to fold tent and move on. And the choreography here again, the order in which the tribes would set out, and how the Levites would tend to the tabernacle. It's all very, very beautiful, and it really hits a climax. It really hits a high point. And it's just so beautiful, and things are going so great. And, Israel's, we built a tabernacle, we formed an army, the encampments are set out, everything is ready to go into Canaan, ready to take the land that Hashem has promised. And that's where we're at here. And that's why we're getting all these descriptions. And that's why it says, these silver trumpets, which you are fashioning now, and which the Kohanim, the priests, will sound in order to assemble the people, or in order to give instructions, depending on what kind of tki'ah or truah, what kind of blast they sound, to instruct the different encampments to start to march forward. It also mentions when you are in the land, this will be how you will assemble for a war, for battle. So things are moving along. Israel's getting ready, and they're about to leave Sinai now. And so Moshe says to, I'm reading here, chapter 10, verse 29, Moshe said to Hovav, son of Reuel, the Midianite, the father-in-law of Moshe. Now we've known him as Yitro, Jethro, but he has, I think, 7 different names given throughout the Torah. Yitro, Yeter, Hovav, Reuel, and there are some others, I believe. There's 7 altogether. I can't think of the others right now, but it's the same person. Moshe said to Hovav, son of Reuel. Remember that Yitro, Hovav, came to the encampment just before we read about the receiving of Torah at Mount Sinai. He brought Moshe's wife, Tzipporah, and her 2 sons, Gershon and Eliezer, and the 2 met, and Moshe told Yitro all about the wonderful things that had transpired, how Hashem had taken Israel out of Egypt, Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, and all that. And Yitro, who had been a practitioner of Avodah Zarah, of idolatry, realizes that Hashem is the only one. He's the only one. All the other gods are false gods. And he has this revelation. Now, moving forward, Moshe said to Hovav, son of Reuel, the Midianite, the father-in-law of Moshe, we are journeying to the place of which Hashem has said, I shall give it to you. Go with us, and we shall treat you well, for Hashem has spoken of good for Israel. So he said to him, I shall not go, only to my land and my family shall I go. So Yitro has decided to return to Midian, to his family. And then Moshe says, please do not forsake us, inasmuch as you know our encampments in the wilderness, and you have been as eyes for us. And it shall be that if you come with us, then with the goodness with which Hashem will benefit us, we will do good to you. So Moshe promises to do good to Yitro if he stays with Israel, because he sees definitely I think not only an honest affection for Yitro, but he sees the advantage of having him around. Apparently he knows the ins and outs of the wilderness. He knows the valleys and the mountains and perhaps where water is found, etc., etc. But Yitro doesn't relent, and he heads back. And then we read, verse 33, when the ark would journey, Moshe would say, arise, Hashem, and let your foes be scattered. Let those who hate you flee from before you. And when it rested, he would say, reside tranquilly, O Hashem, among the myriad thousands of Israel. Okay, these 2 verses, which are spectacularly beautiful, kind of popped in here. Whoa, where are they coming from? Of course, when the ark would journey means when the entire encampment would journey, because the ark, of course, would journey with the tabernacle, and the entire encampment would journey around the tabernacle. And the ark was placed in the innermost sanctum of the sanctuary of the tabernacle, which was the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies, where God's presence was focused. And so the ark here is almost representing Hashem's resting place. And these 2 verses are set within a bracket, even in a Torah scroll. They're always set within a bracket, and the bracket is 2 inverted letter nuns. Nun is let me see, I guess the 14th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Let me just one more time. Kaf is 11, Lamed. Yeah, I think the 14th. Of course, it has the N sound. and it looks like a bracket. It looks like what we call a bracket in non-Hebrew terms. And these two verses are sort of cordoned off from the rest of the book. And a tradition has grown around this, that this is actually a book in and of itself. There are 5 books to the Torah, to the 5 books of Moshe, we call them. They are Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. But the book of Deuteronomy is actually divided into 3 books, everything that precedes these 2 verses and everything that follows. And they really are like a continental divide, because as we've been reading, everything that precedes these 2 verses has been good, right? People are good. People are together. People are organized. People want to do the mitzvot. People want to do the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering. People are in their encampments. People have enlisted for the army. The Levites have all gotten their jobs. Everybody is good. The encampment is going to move on. We're heading toward the Promised Land. This is as good as it gets, literally. Because from this point on, things start to go south, which is the wrong direction. They're supposed to be heading north. Things start to fall apart. Immediately after these 2 beautiful, beautiful ethereal verses, which we say in synagogue when we take the Torah out of the Ark, the Aron HaKodesh, the Ark, Holy Ark, we call it in the synagogue, which houses the Torah scrolls. When we take it out, we sing these verses. And when we turn them, we sing these verses. But immediately after these verses, in what is the first verse of chapter 11 in the book of Numbers, the people took to seeking complaints. It was evil in the ears of Hashem, and Hashem heard, and his wrath flared, and a fire of Hashem burned against them, and it consumed at the edge of the camp. The people cried out to Moshe. Moshe prayed to Hashem, and the fire died down. Okay, and this was the place called Taberah, conflagration in Hebrew. Tav'era. So this wording in English is very carefully written, and it's a very good translation, because in Hebrew it's Vayhi am k mitonanim, meaning the people became as if they were complainers, meaning they had nothing to complain about, and that might have been the problem. So they just started to complain for no reason at all. Right? You have something to complain about. You're hungry. You're thirsty. Okay. Your complaints, your style of complaining may be irritating, but you have a worthy complaint. They had nothing to complain about. And this is what drew God's ire, why his wrath flared, because you're complaining when everything is good and when you're about to enter into the land of Israel. So, they're, what were they, bored? They had too much time in their hands? I don't know. But that caused God's anger to grow, and there was some kind of a fire, and it says it consumed at the edge of the camp. It doesn't say here that people were killed, and I am not up on what the Midrash might say about that question. But as soon as that seemed to be over, then it says the Asafsuf, which is translated as the rabble. Right? Who are the rabble that was among Israel? Well, we know that it was the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, and usually the rabble and the mixed multitude are considered one and the same. They now they began to complain that they wanted meat. They had good meat in Egypt. They want meat. So, you know what? God brought them meat. It got them sick. They got what they wanted and too much of it. But anyway, this is the beginning of rough times for the next, what's going to be 39 years in the wilderness as we read ahead in the book of Numbers. But this music is telling me it's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.